The first time I met Barbara Alden, she was standing on my front lawn with a clipboard and a permanent look of disapproval etched into her forehead. I had just finished unloading a tool chest from the back of my truck when I heard her heels clicking up my driveway like she owned the place. "You must be the new homeowner," she said, eyes narrowing like she'd caught me committing a felony. "Name's Dorian Lang." "Just moved in last week," I replied, wiping my hands on my jeans. She barely acknowledged it. "Well, I'm Barbara Alden, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. I've noticed you haven't returned any of our welcome packets or signed the membership agreement." I tilted my head. "That's probably because my property isn't part of your HOA." Her smile froze. "Every home in this subdivision falls under the HOA's jurisdiction, Mr. Lang. It's mandatory." I walked over to the mailbox, reached inside, and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping handy. I flipped it open, pulled out a copy of the original deed, and handed it to her. "This house was built 2 years before the HOA was even established. It's explicitly exempted in the deed." I double-checked with the county before I even put in an offer. Barbara glanced at the paper, lips pursed tighter than a Ziploc bag. "This can't be accurate. Someone must have made a clerical error. We'll get that fixed." "No need," I said, already turning back toward my garage. "It's legally binding. You can't force me to join." She didn't leave right away. Just stood there, staring at my truck like it offended her personally. It had some rust on the bumper, so I guess it probably did. "I'll be in touch," she called out as she finally walked off. I didn't think much of it. Figured she'd bark a little and move on. I was wrong. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a bright orange violation notice duct taped to my front door. It claimed I owed $400 in fines for unauthorized exterior paint tones and vehicle-based visual disruption. I looked around. My house was beige. My truck was parked in my own damn driveway. By the end of the week, I'd gotten 3 more notices. One said my lawn was half an inch too tall. Another cited non-regulation trash bin placement, whatever that meant. That's when I realized Barbara wasn't going to let this go. She wasn't just some overzealous HOA president, she was on a power trip, and she didn't like being told no. But I wasn't about to roll over for her. This was my property, and she had no say over it. I'd already started collecting every notice she posted, photographing them, and logging the dates. I even installed a camera above my front door, just in case she pulled something sneakier. It didn't take long for things to get even weirder. One night, around 11, I caught a shadow moving across my front yard. I checked the footage the next morning, and there she was. Barbara, flashlight in hand, pacing around my driveway like she was casing the place. I printed the footage and added it to my folder. Next time she came by, I'd be ready. I didn't have to wait long for Barbara to make her next move. 3 mornings later, I stepped outside to find a bright red toe tag hanging from the back bumper of my truck. The paper flapped in the wind like a warning flag, stamped with the HOA logo and a forged-looking signature at the bottom hers. I yanked it off and walked the perimeter of my driveway, looking for anything that might justify the tag. Nothing. No signs, no restrictions, no city ordinance violations. Just my truck, parked squarely inside my private property. When I got to work at the auto shop, I called the county clerk's office during lunch. The woman on the line confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my property, and any action they took against it, especially involving towing, wasn't just baseless, it was illegal. That night, I installed a second camera, this one angled toward the street. If anyone so much as touched my truck, I'd have it all on record. The next morning, at exactly 5:22, headlights swept across my living room ceiling. I shot out of bed and looked through the blinds. A flatbed tow truck was idling in front of my driveway, and a man in a reflective vest was unloading chains. I grabbed my folder of documents and marched outside barefoot, adrenaline already kicking in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, holding up the folder. The tow driver looked up, startled. "I got a work order signed by the HOA president." Said you were in violation and the vehicle needed to be removed. You're trespassing, I said, stepping between him and the bumper. This is private property. I've got the deed right here, and I've already confirmed with the county that the HOA has no authority over this address. You hook that chain and I'll have you charged with theft. He paused, eyes flicking from me to the house, then back to the clipboard in his hand. I don't want trouble, man. I'm just doing a pickup. Then pick up your clipboard and go, I said. Before I call the sheriff, he didn't argue. Just muttered something under his breath and climbed back into the cab. The tow truck rolled away without a sound, leaving only tire tracks and my pounding heart. I stood in the driveway for a long time before going back inside. The camera had caught everything. I downloaded the footage, labeled it, and added it to my digital evidence folder. At this point, it was starting to look more like a case file than a collection of neighborhood squabbles. At lunch, I called a friend of mine, Lydia Grant. She was a municipal attorney I'd known since high school, and she owed me a favor for helping her fix her transmission last winter. I explained the situation, step by step. Sounds like she's operating under color of authority, Lydia said. If she's issuing fake violations or interfering with your property, that's not just civil, it's criminal. You think it's worth filing a report? Absolutely. And I document everything. Paper trail, video, timestamps. If she keeps pushing, we'll take it to the DA. I spent the next 2 days compiling every piece of evidence I had. I printed out the county's zoning maps, historical HOA boundary filings, and my grandfathered deed. I organized every fake violation notice, every photo, every minute of surveillance footage. Then I dropped a copy off at the sheriff's department with a signed statement. I didn't hear anything for a few days, but Barbara noticed. The next Sunday, I came home from the grocery store to find 3 of her board members standing at the edge of my lawn. One of them, a tall guy with a Bluetooth earpiece and a blazer far too formal for a cul-de-sac, stepped forward. "We'd like to speak with you," he said. "Make it fast." He glanced at the others, then said, "Barbara's been under a lot of stress lately. She may have overstepped in some ways, but this neighborhood thrives on unity. We'd prefer to resolve things amicably." "Amicably," I said, setting the grocery bags down on the porch. "She tried to have my property seized, forged documents, trespassed. She sent a tow truck onto land that doesn't belong to her. There's no need to escalate this further," he said. "We could offer you a limited agreement, reduced dues, no active enforcement. A courtesy membership. You want me to pretend I'm part of your HOA so she can save face?" I asked. "Think of it as keeping things civil." I stepped forward and looked him dead in the eye. Civil would have been knocking on my door like a normal person instead of sending a tow truck at dawn. Civil would have been respecting a legal deed, not forging documents. You want civil? Then tell Barbara to stay off my property. They left without another word, but that wasn't the end of it. The next week, I started getting letters, not from the HOA, these were anonymous. No return address. Just plain envelopes with vague threats typed in all caps. "Join or pay the price. You're not welcome here. We know what you're doing." I turned them over to the sheriff. They opened a harassment case and assigned a deputy to patrol the area intermittently. I didn't expect much from it, but it was something. Then came the breaking point. One night, I was sitting in the garage working on a carburetor when I heard a loud crack outside. I ran out to find the driver's side mirror on my truck shattered, glass on the pavement, and a brick lying beside it. The camera had the whole thing. A hooded figure running up from the street, hurling the brick, then disappearing into the darkness. I gave the footage to the sheriff's office the next morning. This time, they took it seriously. By Thursday, Barbara was served with a restraining order. The investigating deputy told me they couldn't yet prove she threw the brick, but the harassment and trespassing were enough to warrant court action. That weekend, the neighborhood buzzed like a kicked anthill. Homeowners huddled on sidewalks, whispers flying. A few even came by to thank me for standing up to her. Turns out, I wasn't the only one she'd steamrolled. She'd find a retired couple for planting native flowers in their own garden. told a single mom her kid's basketball hoop was damaging community aesthetics. Even tried to block a veteran from flying the American flag because the pole was too tall. They'd all paid up or caved in. Now they were seeing someone fight back and win. The next board meeting was open to the public. I went, not to speak, just to sit in the front row and make it clear I wasn't going anywhere. Barbara walked in 10 minutes late, looking rattled. Her usual clipboard was replaced by a manila folder stuffed with loose papers. She avoided eye contact. Several seats down, one of her own board members stood up and announced he was resigning. "Too much liability," he said, "and frankly, I'm tired of cleaning up other people's messes." I didn't say a word the entire meeting, I just watched. Barbara adjourned early, citing personal matters. As people filed out, I caught sight of something on the bulletin board near the door, a flyer for a petition to recall the HOA board. Someone had already tacked on 15 signatures. Change was coming, and for once, it didn't start with the people in charge. It started with the ones they underestimated. The recall petition had cracked something open. By the following week, nearly half the homes on the west side of Willow Creek had signed it. People who'd once kept their heads down were now comparing stories over fences and swapping copies of their violation notices in driveways. I didn't lead anything. I didn't have to. All I'd done was draw a line, and Barbara had stomped right over it. Then things escalated again. It started with the surveyor. He showed up late Tuesday afternoon, a guy in a lime green vest with a laser transit and a clipboard, walking the perimeter of my yard like he was on a mission. I stepped outside and asked if he needed help. "I've been contracted by the Willow Creek HOA to verify boundary lines," he said, adjusting his tripod. "They're submitting an annexation update to the county office." I stared at him. "What exactly are they trying to annex?" He pointed toward the edge of my property. "According to the documents I've been given, this parcel and the adjacent two are being resubmitted for inclusion under revised bylaws." I didn't laugh. I just walked back inside, pulled up the county's GIS database, and checked the filings myself. Sure enough, a new request had been submitted just 2 days earlier seeking to reassign the zoning classification for my property and 2 others that had also refused to join the HOA. It wasn't just a power grab. This was a legal land grab. I called Lydia again. She picked up on the first ring. "They're trying to rezone my property without my consent." She was silent for a beat. "That's not just overreach, it's fraud if they falsified anything in the submission." "I need to know exactly what they filed. Give me an hour," she said. "I'll pull the records." By sunset, she was parked in my driveway with 3 printed pages and a look that told me things just got serious. "They submitted a revised plat map," she said, handing me the documents. "It shows your lot as part of a planned community overlay, signed by a licensed surveyor and stamped with a fake approval from the Planning Commission." My stomach tightened. "They forged the map." "Not just that," she said. "They backdated it by 6 months. And used a fake meeting record to claim the homeowners voted on it." I looked at the signature line on the bottom of the page. "Barbara Alden, HOA President." And next to it, the name of a county official I recognized, but the signature was clearly scanned from another document. "We're looking at wire fraud, falsification of government documents, and attempted property theft," Lydia said. "I'm calling the DA." The investigation moved faster than I expected. 2 days later, county investigators arrived with a warrant for the HOA's office records. Barbara's home, conveniently converted into the HOA's official headquarters, was swarmed by plainclothes officers carrying file boxes and evidence bags. No one answered her door, but they had a warrant and a locksmith. News of the raid spread before the last cruiser pulled away. The next day, the local paper ran a story with the headline, "HOA President Under Investigation for Fraudulent Rezoning Attempt." Barbara didn't show her face for a week. In the meantime, something else happened, something no one expected. Her vice president, a woman named Karen Holloway, went public. She released a statement claiming she'd been pressured into signing HOA filings without reviewing them, including the fraudulent annexation request. More importantly, she handed over a flash drive to the authorities, one containing internal emails, meeting recordings, and a ledger showing tens of thousands in administrative fees that had apparently been rerouted to Barbara's personal account. It wasn't just about me anymore. Barbara had been siphoning HOA funds for years. The county filed charges within a week. Barbara Alden was arrested on 5 felony counts: fraud, forgery, theft by deception, falsifying government documents, and unlawful use of HOA funds. Her bail hearing was scheduled the following Monday, and the courtroom was standing room only. I went. Not out of spite, but because I needed to see it through. She sat in the defendant's chair wearing a navy blazer and a blank expression, refusing to look anywhere but straight ahead. The prosecution laid out the case methodically: the forged plat map, the fake meeting minutes, the siphoned funds. They brought up the brick incident, the anonymous letters, even the tow truck attempt, all as part of a pattern of escalating harassment. Lydia was in the aisle seat beside me. "She's going to lose everything," she whispered, "and she earned every bit of it." The judge denied bail. After the hearing, I walked outside into a swarm of reporters. I kept my mouth shut and ducked past the cameras. I didn't need a spotlight. I just wanted my neighborhood back. Over the next few weeks, the HOA board collapsed. 3 more members resigned. The remaining 2 voted to dissolve the entire organization pending a formal community vote. With Barbara gone, no one had the will or the nerve to defend what was left. The petition to disband the HOA circulated like wildfire. Within 10 days, over 70% of homeowners had signed. The county certified the vote 2 weeks later. Willow Creek HOA was officially dissolved. Something strange happened after that. Without the constant pressure, the neighborhood started to breathe. Kids played basketball in driveways again. Lawns grew a little wild, but no one minded. People waved more, talked more, shared tools, mowed each other's front yards when someone was out of town. One afternoon, as I was replacing a brake line on a neighbor's old Buick, an older man named Elliot from 3 houses down walked over holding 2 beers. He handed me one. "You did all of us a favor," he said. "We were afraid to push back, thought we'd lose our homes. But you reminded us we own them." I clinked the bottle against his and nodded. "Sometimes you just have to call a bully's bluff." The county auctioned off Barbara's home 3 months later. The proceeds went into a fund to reimburse residents fined under her bogus policies. I didn't take a cent. I didn't need to. My driveway was still mine. My house still mine. My truck, beat-up bumper and all, still parked right where it belonged, and Barbara, she was facing trial in the fall. If justice had a waiting list, she was finally on it. The trial began in early October, held in the county courthouse 2 towns over to avoid local bias. By then, Barbara Alden had swapped her designer blazers for a muted gray suit that looked like it had been borrowed from a public defender's closet. Her attorney, a wiry man with a permanent 5 o'clock shadow, spent most of his time objecting to evidence that had already been verified twice over. I wasn't subpoenaed at first. I'd already submitted all my documentation, video files, and the notarized statements. But on the second day, the DA's office called and asked if I'd testify about the forged annexation attempt. I agreed. Not out of pride, frankly. I hated courtrooms, but because I knew how slippery people like Barbara could be. If there was a crack in the wall, she'd find it. When I took the stand, the room was silent. No cameras were allowed, but the gallery was full. Some residents from Willow Creek, a few reporters, and at least one former HOA board member who now looked like he wanted to crawl under the bench. The DA's questions were direct. "Can you confirm that your property was exempt from HOA inclusion from the time of purchase?" "Yes." "The original deed includes a clause that predates the formation of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association by 2 years. Did the defendant, Barbara Alden, acknowledge this when presented with the deed?" She refused to accept it. Then she escalated. I received fabricated violations, a tow attempt, and eventually, a fraudulent annexation filing submitted to the county. The defense tried to undermine my testimony by suggesting I had a personal grudge. "Mr. Lang," the attorney began, flipping through a yellow legal pad, "is it true that you resisted every attempt the HOA made to bring your property into compliance with community standards?" "I resisted unlawful harassment," I replied. "And I didn't resist, I documented." He tried to push further, asking if I'd ever had conflicts in previous residences. I hadn't. In fact, I'd moved to Willow Creek specifically because it wasn't under an HOA until Barbara tried to change that unilaterally. By the end of the day, the jury had seen enough. The prosecution presented a forensic analysis of the forged plat map, complete with metadata from the scanned signature files. A county zoning official testified that the meeting minutes Barbara submitted had never occurred and that the Planning Commission had never seen the filing, let alone approved it. But the most damning revelation came from the HOA's former treasurer, a man named Phil Danner. He took the stand with a binder in his lap and trembling hands. "I was told to sign off on expense reports that didn't match our actual spending," he said, his voice cracking halfway through. "Barbara said it was for legal contingencies and that we'd be reimbursed through increased dues. But the money never came back. It went into an account under her name." The prosecutor handed him a sheet of paper. "Is this the account?" Phil nodded. "That's the one. I didn't know it at the time, but it wasn't a business account. It was a private trust." The ledger showed that over the course of 4 years, Barbara had diverted over $80,000 in fines and fees into that trust. Some of it was spent on remodeling her kitchen. Other withdrawals coincided with spa visits and boutique purchases in another state. She never even tried to deny it. When the verdict came, it was unanimous, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 6 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for at least 3. She was also ordered to pay restitution to the residents of Willow Creek, every cent she'd taken, with interest. But that wasn't the end of it. In the months that followed, the county launched a full audit of every HOA operating within their jurisdiction. They found similar patterns in 2 other neighborhoods, not as bold but close. Fines issued without proper hearings, funds redirected into discretionary accounts. Barbara's case had cracked open a system that had long operated in the shadows. I didn't expect to be involved in what came next, but the county planning board reached out and asked if I'd consider serving as a community liaison, someone who could represent non-HOA homeowners in future zoning decisions. I agreed on one condition: that any future association formed within the county would require full transparency, open accounting, and a voluntary opt-in structure. They passed the measure in a 4-1 vote. Back in Willow Creek, things had already changed. The HOA was officially dissolved, and the common areas once controlled by Barbara's iron grip were handed over to a volunteer committee. The park was cleaned up, the community garden was reopened, and kids started using the basketball court again without fear of citations. One Saturday morning, as I was installing a new floodlight above my garage, a woman I barely knew from the next street over walked up holding a canvas bag. "Brought you something," she said, holding it out. "It's from a bunch of us." Inside was a small plaque carved from reclaimed wood. It read, "This neighborhood stood up because one man wouldn't sit down." I didn't say anything for a second. The breeze kicked up and the sound of a lawnmower drifted in from 2 houses down. "You guys didn't have to do that," I finally said. She gave a tired smile. "We know." "But we wanted to." I hung the plaque in my garage right above the workbench. Winter came. The holidays passed. And by spring, the town council had begun drafting a new policy. Homeowners would be allowed to petition for the removal of any HOA found to be operating outside of its charter. No more forced memberships, no more hidden fines, no more unchecked authority. Barbara's house was sold at auction. The new owners were a couple with 2 kids and a rescue dog that barked every time the mail truck rolled by. No one complained. On a warm evening in May, I stood at the edge of my driveway with a few neighbors, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. Someone had brought out a grill. Someone else had a cooler of soda. No agenda, no meeting minutes, just people talking, laughing, free. The man next to me raised a plastic cup to quiet driveways, stubborn trucks, and neighbors who don't scare easy. I raised mine too. To never needing a clipboard to feel important, we clinked cups. And just like that, Willow Creek wasn't a battleground anymore, it was home.